Hi, Susan Clare here, GourmetQuilter, because quilting is so delicious. So we're doing a little bit more along the lines of our sew along at the moment. We're making these fun blocks to make our quilt. If you've been following along, we're on to part 3 already. So we've already made block 1, which was this one here, and this was block 2 that we did last week. And this week I thought we'd do the alternating block. So I'm doing the 3 colourways. So I've gone ahead and I've made my alternating blocks. I've just got one to finish off just to show you how to construct it. So it's basically a sort of a star with these 4 patches in the corner, and I've just used different blues to create the different look, but it's more or less forming not so much a star look on some of those colorways, but it's forming this chain that we get across here. So this is the alternating block. So there's quite a few of these that we need to make with these other ones that we're making in between. So I've got, as I've just shown you the blue ones, these are my red and green ones. Same thing, I've changed the colors around a little bit because I'm using what I've got, but sticking with a theme of colors, red and green on this one. And then with my darker one, the darker one looks a little bit different simply because I've used quite a strong contrast with this sort of yellowy, mustardy, orangey colour there, and it's definitely standing out much more as a star on this colourway. So it's quite interesting how you can change the look of things simply by changing colours. So it's not so much that you're trying to make something one way or the other, but things change when you change the colours. So it's quite a good way to play with fabrics, to have a little look at different things that you can achieve simply by changing the colourway on a block without necessarily changing anything else. So this block is already made up the right size to match these, so that we don't need to put a frame around. We're simply making the block and it's the right size to alternate with these others. So we need to make a quilt like I'm doing here, we need to make 13 of these alternating blocks. So that's quite a few, so I've been quite busy making my 3 colourways here. And there's notes for you on GourmetQuilter.com on the Sew Along 2021. So that's going to be part 3 that we're doing. So we're getting along really well, and the idea of this is that there are more of these to make, so that you'll be able to keep making these while we're doing some of the other blocks as well, so that by the end of the quilt you've got all your alternate blocks, and we'll be going to be doing some quilt as you go so that you can see how to do all that. But I thought if we got the alternate blocks underway, that would be really helpful while we do the other things. So what I've done here is constructed like a 9 patch. So initially we have to make 4 patches for the corners of the block. So you need 4 patches for each block. The notes of course tell you all this. And then these side pieces here that form the star points are a larger square that's the same size as your 4 patch, and we need to put corners on 2 corners of those. So much the same as when we make our half square triangle. I had a larger square here. I've already done 1 corner. I've got to do the second one for the star point. So it started out as a square, larger square with a smaller square on top. So these are 2.5 inch squares, the smaller ones, the same as we've been using throughout so far, and then these are 4.5 inch. Now I should also just mention at this stage that this centre square is a 4.5 inch square of a colour, and if you're working with 2.5 inch strips that would be tricky. You could easily make that a 4 patch in the centre there, because that is the same size, of perhaps all greens or whatever colour it is that you're working with, if you didn't want the large centre square like that. And then so these outside ones, these are 4.5 inches. As I said, I stitched that on there on the diagonal. I did my second line of stitching and I've cut that apart and then pressed that out. So in order to put the 2 points on each of these larger squares, you need to go through that whole process with one before we can do the second, because this next one is going to overlap where it intersects there. So I've got my square ready. I've marked my lines. I've got my diagonal line from point to point, and then I've got my second line 1/2 inch away. So we want to position it so that that diagonal line through point to point crosses over in the centre there. So that we're going to stitch on both of those lines again, and then when that one folds back, that will intersect at about the right space or place for the 1/4 inch seam allowance that we're going to take when we sew them on to the centerpiece. So I'll go ahead and get these stitched. I think it's fairly straightforward doing this sort of sewing. I think you probably know how to do it, but I'll show you just in case. So I'm just going to come along that diagonal line at the moment. And you can chain piece these, of course, same as we have been with other things. And then I'm going to do this second line of stitching here. It's so exciting to see these blocks all coming together. And then we can trim that corner away. I'm getting quite a collection, especially making 3 colorways of all these little cutaway triangles. So now I'm going to cut halfway between my 2 stitching lines so that I've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance on there. I don't need the little corners. We can pop those with the rest of my collection that I'm making there. And then press this and press the seam into, oops, too many blocks, into the coloured triangle corner there. So that's looking pretty good now. So you need 4 of those units for each block and 4 of those units for each block, and then the centre square in the middle. So it's effectively a 9 patch, but some of the patches are pieced. And then we need to join them across. So I need to do a second one of this. This is the same thing at both ends. So I've got my 9 patch here. You put the colour in against the points there, and that ends up giving you that chain, because these will then link up. If you can seal this with the next block, and you'll get that chain coming through, and then the star, and then the chain, etc. So I'll go ahead and get these joined up and show it to you when it's all finished. So that was the last seam that I needed to do to make the last of my alternating blocks. So what I'm doing now, I'll just talk about pressing the seams. So I've pressed the seams from the points ones out in towards the 9 patches, and some of the reasoning for this is on these ones, these seams here where these points come in, those seams are quite bulky, so they want to go into that plainer piece in the middle and things. And then so I've pressed them out that way there, out that way there, and then these seams here I'm pressing both of those in for the same reason, that it's quite bulky where they overlap just there, and it will sit better if that seam can go in there. So I'm just pressing that in there, and that's all looking pretty good, I think. So that was the last of my alternating blocks in my red and green colourway. So I've now got 13 delicious blocks in that colourway. Oh, it's so exciting to have all these blocks made. And I've got my 13 delicious blocks in my blues, and my 13 delicious blocks with my colours with the darker background. So that was the alternating block. As I said, you make 13 each of those. They're measuring the same as the other blocks so that they will alternate. And that will be it for this time, and I will see you again next time with some information. Most likely we'll start on some of the quilting next time. That'll be fun, so that we can start putting things together as we go as well.